Everyone, I see some people are joining into the webinar. We're going to get underway in just a minute. I'll just give about 30 seconds or so for the chance to other people to join in, and then we will get underway. So hold tight, and we'll be underway in just a second. Thank you very much. Great, let's do a few more people still joining in. We'll get underway in about 15 seconds or so, so just hold tight. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, How to Enable Faster Go-to-Market with AI, presented by Virtuoso with your host, myself, James Bent. I'm the VP of Solution Engineering here at Virtuoso. And yeah, look forward to running this session. Okay, so what are we here to talk about? So today's agenda, how to enable faster go-to-market with Virtuoso's AI. So, I mean, as we know, IT plays a role, really core role in any modern business, especially when it comes to thinking about keeping the business running, the workflows, the applications that are going through the business, where quality assurance absolutely takes a center stage to that. So today we're going to learn about Virtuoso's AI-driven end-to-end test automation platform, really to focus on helping understanding how quickly you can create tests with AI-assisted authoring and the type of tests really you typically look at creating, how AI helps to minimize test maintenance efforts, and then the last piece, end-to-end test automation, how you build out in terms of integrating it into your environments, orchestrating it, and running it across, for example, different browsers. So those three main areas intersecting with our AI-driven end-to-end test automation. So for Virtuoso, and I'm not a fan of just reading lots of text on slides, so just sort of summarize for those who don't know about us, is essentially we are an AI-powered end-to-end functional testing platform. We do target only web applications at the UI layer. Well, the great thing there is it could be any web application, whether it's Salesforce or Oracle Cloud, SAP Cloud, whether it's Dynamics or an in-house front-end or back-end browser-based system. And really the benefit of our platform, it's a natural language platform, is to speed up testing, both the creation and the running of tests. And again, focusing on the areas that we'll be looking at, which will be obviously the authoring, the maintenance, and the orchestration. So we do cover front-end testing, end-to-end data-driven testing, and you can also combine both the UI but also the API layer, where very typical use cases for us are when you're developing new web applications, typically enterprise applications, doing digital transformation testing across different business systems, but particularly where there's a driver. Time is really critical, as well as assuring quality, but then having this integrated into your environments. So that's Virtuoso in a nutshell. We'll obviously be showing it to you today as well. And in terms of the really key things, why you would even consider using Virtuoso, it's around 4 key areas, risk, cost, quality, and time. So it's basically being able to maintain the either existing levels of complex testing you do, whether that's manually or within frameworks, but doing it where you're typically being able to move much faster at a lower cost per test, but then being able to assure the same level of quality and obviously then mitigate risk if you can both continue testing at a faster pace or increase coverage, for example. Those are typically the key reasons why people are considering Virtuoso. So then, really though, what are we going to actually talk about today? Because what we want to do is give a sort of a discussion around some key areas around the capabilities we have, showing how those are utilized and how they build in to those types of testing, particularly when you think about things like end-to-end testing, for example. And 4 sort of main areas, firstly, under AI-driven test authoring. So we have sort of really 4 key capabilities. The first of which is being able to identify, we'll say objects, but actually elements in the web application using AI. It's typically one of the biggest things that people struggle with, is being able to go through and find, let's say, the selectors, or having to build keywords for particular elements they're trying to interact with. I'll show you how you don't have to do that in Virtuoso. Showing how that using natural language enables you to, move away from a code-based approach potentially, or transition people who are more familiar with manual testing, but also being able to show how you can actually even start building before the application's even ready. Let's talk about how we use AI to assist with data generation and how that factors into data-driven testing. But also the fact that while we don't call ourselves low code, there could be this sort of perception that because we do look maybe a bit more like a low code platform, it abstracts away from, let's say, writing in code. We still allow, through extending natural language with your own natural language commands, to be able to make this a very configurable and extendable solution. So let's just take a look at a few of those areas in terms of how that really works. So firstly, for us in Virtuoso, now again, we're a browser-based application ourselves. We're a SaaS application. So it makes it really easy to get up and running with us. Of course, we are a commercial platform, so you would need to get signed up with us. But in terms of getting running, the only real consideration is more about connectivity. So as long as you can connect your environment, which we have solutions for that, some tunneling and fixed IP solutions, in principle, you actually get ready pretty quickly to be able to start building out your tests. Now, the first area that we talked about was object identification. Or rather, I suppose, in our platform, it's the lack of having to do that. Sometimes when I show this to people, they're almost saying, what did you have to do beforehand that you didn't show me to be able to enable me to identify objects? So here we've actually got an application that's ready. We've got a live rendering of the browser here, and I'm going to go through the login steps. And I want to write a value into the username field. So using our natural language syntax, I can come in and I could say I'm going to write my email address as the value. I look at the screen and I see it says username. So I'm going to write username, for example. And when I click on save, again, without having set anything up, we're using AI with bots to go and identify that particular element, that object, and interact with it. I could come in and do the same for my password, and that's not my real password for anybody in case they try and hack it, but there you go. I can write my password in the password field just using, if you like, the hint on the screen and interact with it. Again, we're using AI with bots to go and find that element in the DOM structure. Even if I've got this checkbox, which there could be multiples on the screen, that's fine, because I could say something like, look for remember me. And then in the next step, I could say, click on the left checkbox, and it enables me to interact in this case with a non-specific element. It could be multiple checkboxes, but I've given context with this remember me step. Now in the background, when I click on I'm done here, we will build, if you like, the model of that object. We'll populate the XPath and IDs, the classes, or JS paths and so on. We'll build that model. But what I'll talk about in the maintenance side is we're not fixed to that model. That's really, really important. And the interesting thing is you don't have to populate these. Sometimes people think they have to write them in. You don't. Those are populated automatically. Now, I could come in and say, actually, what if I've got something on the screen that doesn't have a label that I can use? So we give you access into the dev tools, and the natural language could come and say, where I've got this image, for example, I could look and say that's got a class, which is login logo. And I could actually write using, let's say, a class or an ID. It doesn't have to be specific. So the login logo could just say, I'm using a class name. We'll look for that on the screen and interact with it. And then finally, I could come in and, let's say, click on the login button. So I'm doing this and able to come in. And then obviously I've got an error message here. So the natural language syntax also extends to assertions, which could be look for invalid username, for example. So basically the premise here is using a natural language approach, which could be write or press or click. We've got lots of different actions available, as well as assertions, whether it's looking for or asserting values. you're able to build out using a natural language approach with just what we call hints, whether it's the actual labels or whether it's classes, IDs. Probably wouldn't recommend using an XPath, so that I can start building tests immediately. The really nice thing with this, I don't need to have the application even ready. I could be saying, I've got some user stories or requirements. And what I'm doing is I want to go in and start building as soon as I know that there will be a change in the application. So for example, here I could say, we're going to put in a new button. Let's just call it new button. I'm doing that in natural language with the value that I expect it to have, because I'm looking at wireframes or designs or requirements, user stories, and I'm doing that prior to anything being built. So that's sort of really powerful in terms of how you can start building out your tests using a natural language approach. And just very quickly, because the next thing we'll talk about is data. What you're actually then looking to build out are what we call journeys, more end-to-end workflows, which can be divided into these, what we call checkpoints, almost scenarios, where if you see it's got a purple box around it, that can be a reusable sequence. So for example, instead of having to come in and log in test, instead of having to come in and say, write the login steps every single time, instead I can come in and say, I'm at the login screen. What I'm going to do, I know I've got the login steps, so I could go into the library, use my login sequence and drop that in. And now I'm starting to compose with reusable natural language, if you like. But in that, then I can start mapping data. Whether I've got environment data, because you can run the test against different environments. I can set that up in the environment manager. But then when I come starting to do my scenarios, for instance, here I'm creating a customer, and then this is an insurance portal, so I'm creating an insurance policy. You'll see we're mapping in variables, where one side of this is to use test data sets. So I could come in and upload a CSV file, and I could have my data scenarios in here, which could be a mix of, generic data through to system data. But what I can also do, we have an AI data generator, where I could say this could be customers from US, for example, and I could say create 10 customers with first name, last name, street address, city, postcode, and phone number, all in the US. And this allows me to sort of create generic data sets, which then I could augment, let's say with, it could be more system values adding into there. So I could create my data table, and then I could come and add into that and say, right, now I'm going to add a system value in here. So system value, which could be, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, for example. So very quickly be able to create sort of dummy data, whether it's could be people, addresses, or any sort of data you want to map in. Combining that again with test data, could be more, again, the system values here. And then I can map those into my test. So I could say in this test, I'm going to pull out a test data table, map that in, and then assign all the different variables into my test, so that then I could data drive this test and run it against different scenarios. Now I could also come in and I can, with my natural language, as I mentioned, you can extend the platform. So I could come in and create my own natural language commands. We call them extensions. But it could be to say, and I'm going to call this webinar today, for example. That's going to be my natural language command. I'm going to create this. And now if I wanted to create, let's say, today's date, or it could be creating names or addresses, I can drive that with JavaScript. But even if I don't know JavaScript, I could come in and say, create today's date in day, month, year format, drop that in, and it will create JavaScript for me. And then all I need to do is just say, I'm going to get back this function. So I can just say, return that function into the test. Now, when I come into my test, I could say, I'm going to come in over here. I'm going to run this through, and I'm going to write a test step, which will be webinar today, returning my today value. And now what I've done is created my own natural language command that will go through, and as you can see, it's generated today's date exactly as I wanted. I mean, that's a very simple example. You can also use it for performing different functions and so on. The point is that you can make this very extendable and customizable. It's not just a fixed out-of-the-box platform. In addition to the natural language and sort of operating at the UI layer, you can also factor in using API calls, so for test data. So for example, I can build out my APIs and I can set it up the same as you do in sort of most API tools, but this isn't API testing. What I'm using this for then is to come in and say, I could test both at the UI, but in this case, for example, this is Salesforce I'm coming into. I could log into Salesforce. The test asks me to change the status of an existing opportunity. But if I don't know what's in the system, I can go into the UI, but then I could use API calls. In this case, I could make a token call, then use that token to create another API call to create an account, and then use that account to create an opportunity and store the record ID. And then I could jump back into the UI. I could use get calls. I could integrate via an API into databases. So you hopefully start to see how you can test, functionally test across different business systems in browser, in the UI, but incorporate API calls as well for data-driven testing. So that's sort of really a snapshot of what we're using AI for data-driven testing, particularly in that data-driven end-to-end testing scenario. But then we can consider, really then what does that enable us to do in terms of the benefits, which are, you can reduce your test authoring time by 60% or greater, empower teams so you can have different people participating in this. You've got a single platform which targets different browser-based applications and data-driven applications. So this isn't just one solution for Salesforce, another for Dynamics, another for your in-house app. And it is designed through this approach. You can build out these more complex scenarios, end-to-end tests across multiple web apps, combining with back-end APIs. So it's really about accelerating core product regression, and that could be a single product or your application suite. But then on top of that, test maintenance is a massive issue typically, where you have browser-based applications in particular become very dynamic. You have dynamic changes, but also, that could be because of various reasons. Because, like in Salesforce, for example, every time you load the page, form fields get assigned new IDs and classes dynamically. XPath change. It could be that happens on release, or it could be because you're running against different environments. So what we'll talk about is how we're using self-healing, which is AI ML driven, to be able to go through and re-identify elements as the tests are running automatically and heal them as the test runs. So, and this is done very accurately. We'll also talk about how we've got an AI assistant for journey summaries. So quite often, maintenance is also maintenance of your test pack, understanding what tests you have. But if you've got a 200-step test, or it's written in code, or it's just, it's written in a way that's not easy to see what the test is doing, we have an AI assistant to generate summaries of the tests. But then also we have maintenances around maintaining the output of your testing, which is typically understanding what went on in the test. What if a test fails, why is that? So we'll also show you how we have an AI root cause analysis to be able to suggest why a test may have failed, so at least the tester themselves can first triage it rather than sort of ping-ponging back and forwards with the engineers and waiting for their feedback. So let's take a look at those. And firstly, if you recall, when the tests are being run, we're capturing and building that initial model of each of those elements. So we're going in and capturing, whether it's the XPaths or IDs or classes or so on. But again, we're not fixed to that. Every time the test runs, we are using AI test maintenance or self-healing, where you come in and say, for example, this is Dynamics, and say, I've got a step to look for my work, which we can find. But in the background, we saw that all the selectors changed, the classes, the IDs, the XPaths, they all changed. So where we have these little sticking plasters or band-aids for anyone in the US, these are all AI-driven self-healing points which happen at runtime as the test is running to basically re-identify those elements and heal them automatically. That does work very reliably. Anyone really sort of freaking out at the idea of it just going sort of nuts all over the place and clicking everything, it really doesn't. And something we can talk about is the fact that, of course, we expect anybody to validate that on their applications. But that really, it's very understated, because at the end of the day, we're showing that it self-heals and it does it well. But really the benefits of that are that if you can reduce your test maintenance burden, if you're meaning that you don't need to have people who are sitting there fixing tests before you can run them and having, huge bottlenecks because testing can't be run, that's what really this reduces down. Especially if you consider in this test, all these sticking plasters or band-aids are self-healing points, which is very realistic in very dynamic applications. So then, in addition to that, with the self-healing, we can then talk about, again, how you can summarize what the test is even doing. So for example, I could come in, I've got a test here, or let's go into this one here, that goes across a number of different screens, and it's got a bunch of steps. And even though I've labeled it to try and sort of show what's happening, it might not be very easy to not so much read the test steps, but more to say, what is the test doing in summary? So what we then have is a generator to be able to say, I can generate an AI summary that tells me in a few paragraphs, this is what the test is doing. It looks through and says, we're logging in, we're going to an insurance app, we're creating a customer, we're then creating a policy. And once we've done that, we're going to switch into another application, which, for whatever steps that is. So that enables us to put on and basically put a summary for anybody just to read through so they can check what the test does. That's AI driven, but in addition, we can do things like put tags on. So I could say, well, this could be part of my main policy and regression testing. So I can put tags on. So now, you can start to actually see what the tests are doing and then read the summaries, even though, yes, you can technically come through and read in natural language as to what the test is doing. So that's part of maintenance as well, to maintain your test packs, to be able to organize through your test packs, your goals, put tags and summaries on to be able to very quickly come through and say, I can tell what these are doing. And then finally, we mentioned about AI root cause analysis. So what we'll talk about in a second is the fact that we're not just an authoring platform. This is where you run your tests. So when the tests do run, this is also where you're reporting on them. So you can see here on the 23rd of April, we ran a job that had 12 tests in them. So you can run tests in parallel here. These were data-driven tests. So I ran 12 different scenarios, and we can see that 2 of those failed. And we've got obviously a summary view of that. So what I can do now is I can scroll through and see when tests are running, we get readable test steps, we get screenshots captured, we get things like step level timings, we get event logs for the network and what's happening in the console, for example. So it helps with sort of debugging and so on. But even with that, if I come down and see there's a failure here, I might not be able to tell what went wrong. Even though I've got all that rich information, I can say, well, actually, I don't know quite what went wrong. So then what we can do is we have what we call, we have a root cause analysis to drill in and summarize if this is run before. We see the past one, we see the current screenshot, we see the page source and network at the time it runs, but that's, you're still relying on someone to translate that. So what we have available is an AI capability to analyze that failure and provide insights. Doesn't mean these are correct insights. It just means insights based on all the information as to what may have gone wrong to help people start to triage this. So in this case, we can see that the element may not have been found. So we were looking for a data-driven test, which was ARIA Cruise in this case. We can see on screen that that's searching for a doctor and they didn't appear. So that may be actually the cause of the test, which is what the root cause has suggested. It could be that the data wasn't correct. Maybe that's got to be updated. Or it could be to say, actually, maybe a previous step didn't action correctly, which meant that this step wasn't able to execute. So it starts giving some tips to be able to try and analyze this, this is a very basic one, but it could also use things like the outputs of an API call giving a 401, or there being a client server error in the network. These sorts of things are pulled out in the AI root cause analysis to help suggest and help triage. Again, it's a reduction in the maintenance in terms of maintaining the test suite to understand, do I need to update them? Or part of the running the tests is to obviously report and identify issues and real issues and get those reported in. So again, off the back of that, what we see is through that, the benefits really of the AI in the test maintenance are that, you really will obliterate test maintenance. We see that customers cut their maintenance burden by 88% or more. And a lot of that is combined with both reduction in maintenance from the self-healing and the natural language, but also through the benefits of being able to organize their tests, maintain them, update the tests, the actual with changes, or report on them. And because again, you can, if you are having to make updates, you're having to maintain the actual changes, being able to do that with natural language before the changes have occurred means that you're gaining additional speed gains. So what you'll really end up with is, instead of having to spend a lot of time fixing flaky tests, you're actually spending more time triaging real issues, including getting insights into those. So then finally, what we're going to talk about is how we help to orchestrate your tests, what sort of integrations we have. So basically, how you actually get this running using Virtuoso's AI-driven test automation. We'll talk about how you can orchestrate your regression packs. You can schedule them, but also through integrations, how you can hook them into your pipelines. How the fact that we run on a headless Chrome browser, but you can hook into things like Browser Stack or Lambda test, and how tests are by default run in parallel to be able to scale your testing. So just looking into those areas. So once we have gone in and allowed you to come in and say, I've built my tests out, I've used the natural language, I've built my end-to-end tests, I've factored in the data, wherever the data is coming from. I've put in my labels and my summaries and organized it into test packs. What I can do now is start building out my execution plans, my orchestration plans. So I can come in and say whether I'm building my regression pack, a cross-browser suite. I can come in and say, here's my regression pack. I've got my settings. I'm maybe going to run it against a different environment. Maybe that environment only has so much capacity, so I'll limit how many parallels can run on it. I'm going to configure devices. So whether I'm running it on the headless Chrome browser, or I'm going to factor in and say, well, let's run on Windows 10 and Edge, and on the latest version, for example. Or I want to go also on the Chrome browser, but I want to run on the beta version, which we don't have on our platform. Then you can start building up your device hive, where this would run on Virtuoso. These would be passed through to Browser Stack or Lambda test. You can bolt those in. Then I can decide which test do I want to run. Do I want to pull from a particular test pack, a particular goal? Do I want to do that based on tags or look for specific journeys? Do I want to data drive these and factor in which data scenarios to run? So you can orchestrate this, and then I could either schedule it, or I could come in and hook this into pipelines. So we're an open API, very easy for you to use. We've got existing scripts and robot frameworks to build into your pipeline as part of the job, so that you can run this as part of your existing infrastructure, have the tests run in Virtuoso. So again, we're your grid for those running on headless Chrome, and then have version test results. So first I've got job level reports that I can drill into with various filters. I can then drill into a particular job and get a dashboard on this. And then obviously go down to the test level, and all that information could be passed back into pipelines. But then we do also have additional integrations. So for example, into Jira, we allow you to come in and say, I could create a ticket into Jira for a particular issue. It pulls in the projects. So I could search and say, I want to go into my dev project, for example. And effectively, then I can come in and create an issue into, let's say, Jira to push your issues into there. I can come in and in my execution plans, I can set up, I could have email notifications. I could have Slack set up to be able to push those across. And I could have that based on rules. So we have integrations for that, as well as integrating into things like Jira, X-Ray, and TestRail to be able to push test results. So we're able to basically create, have this as your end-to-end browser-based functional UI and API testing platform to build tests, manage them, orchestrate and run them, have it self-healing and maintaining, as well as obviously getting all of your test reports from a dashboard level down to all the way down to the test step level. And really, so if we jump back, the benefits of that again are that, you are able to fit this into your end-to-end testing. You can run tests in parallel. You can speed up your test execution time and integrate it with pipelines. And in principle, you can allow anybody, whether BAs, business users, testers, whether technical or not, whether engineers, to be able to build, run, and maintain tests, whether that's on our headless Chrome or cross-browser. You're really going to scale your automated testing across your browser-based products. So with that, in summary, we've obviously a bit of a whirlwind tour, but hopefully you sort of gathered, some of this stuff some people may have seen before, some of it may be new, but hopefully this is a good insight into, what our platform offers, how it operates and works, and, particularly in that end-to-end testing sphere. So to that end now, we come to the Q&A, and if anybody has any questions, you're welcome to put it into the Q&A section of the webinar. Equally, of course, you can always come to our website, virtuoso.qa. There is a contact form where you can reach out to us. And then we have, obviously, our documentation, which is docs.virtuoso.qa, as well as a very healthy YouTube channel with a plethora of videos to be able to understand different capabilities. So I do see a question that's come up, which is, I see that you say that you do browser-based testing only. So does that mean you don't do desktop? The answer is that's correct. Unless, of course, those desktop applications are rendered in a browser. So some applications are moving that way. Otherwise, from a functional perspective, it is only browser-based UI testing, although you could test, of course, via the APIs at a data level. We have a question around how to generate a report with test results for someone who doesn't have access. So could we have a robot framework output? The answer is, if you are integrating, let's say, could be Azure DevOps, we have a robot framework that does pass back test results. You could have JUnit results. You can provide access, and we do have roles-based access into Virtuoso. So we're not a license-based platform, and therefore you could give it, whether it's a business team or client team, you could actually give them access into a read-only access into test results, but it is also possible to export results from Virtuoso, and we are building out more dynamic dashboarding, which will enable you to share, let's say, by emails or download into PDFs test results. So yes, they can be exported via integrations, and we are working to put that into the interface as well. Okay, we've got another question, which is, so can this handle Salesforce, Dynamics, but also can it handle things like React applications? That's a great question. It's one that comes up because sometimes, when you say it can handle anything in a browser, you still need to qualify, because lots of applications actually might say they can do that, but when you try to run it against different browser apps, they might fall over, for instance, with things like shadow DOMs. So for us, we are generally agnostic. Is the only caveat to that is we do rely on the DOM structure of the application. So if you have a canvas-based application, which is largely graphical, then obviously we can't interact with those canvases. But otherwise, no, we haven't found web applications that we can't handle. Although that I would say, I always joke that there are no such thing as real such thing as web standards. So you do find there are patterns that you use within different applications as to how you write natural language steps. For example, no drop-down in two applications are rarely ever implemented the same way. So you might use slightly different natural language commands. Question here, do you have a trial version? The answer is we don't have a trial version, largely because while the platform's very easy, people do require to have some support more around not so much how to get going with it, but what they use it for. And we do find as well, we're a commercial platform. So typically the reason someone would be looking for it is because they're looking to engage with us to come onto Virtuoso, in which case we usually run more supported proof of values with our customers and prospects and users. So I would sort of encourage you, if there is a real sort of thinking this might be something we do, we can absolutely support you in more of a pilot-based approach. Another question, so can you integrate with databases? The answer to that is not directly. So we sit on the cloud in AWS. So we don't integrate directly to a database, but what we do allow is saying, if you can make an API call to a connector, which you would run on the same server as the database, typically a small connector which receives the API call with the query, then just creates the connection with the database, then you absolutely can connect into databases, and that's what customers typically do. Another question, how easy is it actually to use? So for anybody who does come in, and I run a lot of proof of values with a lot of organizations and support them through that. And what I see people doing is they are starting to create tests on day one. They will get stuck in places largely because they're trying to figure out how their application works and how that's tested. But we're not talking sort of major things. It's just small pointers we guide them with, such that by the end of week one, I see people who are generating multiple data-driven tests, including generating their own natural language commands to put in, sort of custom extensions and creating these sort of end-to-end workflows that are going across multiple applications. That's a genuine thing that we see. And when we say people, we're talking about people who are not automators, who are not technical folks, although we obviously have those using it. These are non-technical people who maybe have never participated in automation before. So nothing is so easy that you don't have to read anything, but it is very relatively straightforward still. Is there a possibility to use 2 data tables in one journey? That's a great question. And at this stage, the answer is no. It's fixed to 1 data table. Although that is obviously something that we are looking at. So we continuously develop our platform. You can see from our change log on our website, we continuously review, and you can imagine that's something that we've been asked before. So no, it is fixed to 1 data table in terms of the test data, which does mean that then you do have to think about how you would set up and build your data. It's not like a relational database. However, we are both looking at those, but then we also help from an enablement perspective to understand both how you use the platform, but how you incorporate it. So to be clear, the answer to that question is no, you can't use 2 data tables, but it is likely at some point that, or at least we're reviewing that sort of scenario. What is the roadmap of new functionalities in the near future? Well, one thing I didn't show is we're actually starting to look at generative AI for passing in more sort of pure natural language to be able to generate tests from. We do have a beta already of being able to select regions of the page, put in like sort of a more freeform command and have it start generating test steps. What we find with that though is that it's a little bit too micro in nature. It's sort of going down and it's almost generating 3 or 4 test steps at a time. We're actually we have a hackathon in about a week or so where we're looking at ideas now, particularly with the advancements of AI, as to where we can go. And one very common thing that's being talked about is generating tests from requirements, or even being able to migrate and say, could I take a Selenium test and be able to pull that across? That's not to suggest that's what we will do, but it's to say that what we are doing on the roadmap is looking at how we incorporate generative AI more on a sort of co-pilot approach, if you like. But then another area, sort of more on a sort of day-to-day side, is business process orchestration. So of course, a typical issue with testing is running asynchronous tasks where you have batch processes, where it's just not easy to be able to go through and say, put a 1-hour wait between my tests. Whereas what we're doing now is saying, actually, if we can build out a business process orchestration to actually allow you to do that, that becomes very powerful for the realities of testing across business systems, including things like batch data or jobs that have to run at a certain stage. So that's something we're really quite excited about. We do, of course, have a further roadmap, and I'd encourage, any sort of discussion, if anybody wants to sort of ping in our contact form, if all you want to do is chat to understand a bit more about us, about things like what's coming, more than happy to talk to you about that. But we do have a pretty solid roadmap coming up. Okay, well, look, my throat is getting a bit parched. I think I need a glass of water, and that's been quite a lot of really great questions. Thank you very much. So what I will do is just close out to say, if you do want to know more, we genuinely are very open to having conversations and realize that nobody's going to just be pushed into sort of taking something. So don't think we're going to come and contact us and we're going to now push you into a hard sell, where we'll have an open conversation, see if there's a fit for what you're trying to achieve, both technically, value-wise, in terms of the benefits you get, and of course, commercially. So you can come to virtuoso.qa, go to the contact form, or equally, remember, you can go to our docs.virtuoso.qa, or we've got our YouTube videos. In any case, I hope you've enjoyed the webinar today. It's been a pleasure to be able to present it. As always, we'll have more coming up. So all I'll do now is to say, have a good rest of the day, wherever you are in the world, and hopefully we might talk again. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody.